So I think we can start now. Thank you all for joining. For those who just joined in, thank you for joining the webinar. For today's discussion, we would be sharing more about our insights from the field research, focusing on the intersection between Agritech and FinTech. So this is actually our maiden webinar, and we have a lot of webinars lined up for the next few months on health, education, and FinTech. But for this webinar, our main focus is on Agritech, the intersection between Agritech and FinTech. And we are really happy to collaborate with our partners at the AgTech Network that will be, who would also bring their experience in the conversation as well. So just a brief introduction into who we are. Since I have the floor, I would share about a little bit about myself, then I'll give the floor to Natalia to also share. My name is Sasha. I am a UX researcher based in Accra, Ghana, and I'm recently transitioning into the role of an Agritech research lead, where I focus on building expertise and knowledge around this field. I have been working as a UX researcher at UX for about 3 years now, and I've worked on different projects across the continent. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share with you my experiences and some of the wealth of knowledge I've been able to gather over the past 3 years, and also really eager to learn from you during the Q&A session. I would move to a pause and introduce Natalia to also introduce herself.
Thanks, Sasha, and welcome everyone. Sorry for a bit of a delay in starting. So Sasha mentioned I'm a guest speaker on this webinar. My name is Natalia. I worked in digital agriculture space for about 12 years now, maybe more. So currently based in Berlin, and happy to speak more with you during the section where we'll present the opportunities in digital agriculture and why UX is important. Back to you, Sasha.
Great, sounds good. Just moving on to our agenda. Our agenda for today will be covering 4 major topics of discussion. The first one being a macro perspective of Agri-FinTech, which will be led by Natalia shortly. We would also be sharing some tips and learnings on how to conduct research in rural areas. Also, some challenges that we face in conducting field research, and what are the ways to overcome these barriers to adoption. And finally, we would also be sharing some resources as well with you at the end of the presentation. Moving on to the next slide. Moving on to the next slide on our housekeeping rules, just kindly mute your mic just so we avoid some interruptions from you. However, we would like to really have a collaborative and interactive session with you in the chat section. So if at any point in time you have questions, suggestions, feedback, whatever the case may be, kindly drop it in the comment section, and my colleagues Kalama and Oluchi will be monitoring the chat section so that we can answer any questions that might come along. I think I would hand the mic to Jan, if Jan is on the call, to present more about UX and the UX Academy before we go more into the content of the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Sasha, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to see friends that we know over here and people that we don't know. So welcome everyone. Very briefly, because we're already a bit late and we want to give as much time as possible for Q&A and exchange on that. But yeah, maybe if we can go to the next slide, just introducing UX for you who don't know. But we are a Pan-African research and design agency. We do everything that we do because we want to make sure we have digital products that really are related to the local context. Because for us, it's important that the people's cultural identity and needs are reflected in the product that they use. So we've been doing that for quite a few years right now. And one of the side missions that we have is to make design and research accessible. And this is why we have an academy. This is why we also do a lot of this training session and sharing session like we have today. Maybe on to the next one, just to share a bit about, even though I'm based in Senegal and we have a team that now it's all across the continent, but we mainly work with 3 types of stakeholders. One is the people having a social impact or on overall, international development organization in education, agritech, healthcare. Mostly. We also work a lot with big technology company, and a lot of those will be fintech companies, but it could be something different as well, notably Google or Wikipedia recently. But what we like is working also with local champions, local startups that grow fast. Sometimes we are in challenging environment and we love to support them. So if you are from a startup world, we will be very happy to engage with you guys. And this is also transitioning to the next slide. It's also why we created the UX Academy in the first place, which is the professional training center. So don't think of it as a school where you're gonna have degrees and everything. It's really professional, hands-on, and really focus on the two things that we think we do well is UX research and UX UI design. And there is different type of classes. We'll come back on that at the end of the webinar if we have time. But there is an upcoming online session that will arrive in May that is open to everyone. So again, the mission of the Academy is to make sure we make design accessible and high quality on the continent. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it for just a little intro. I'm very happy to follow on with you, and again, welcome you. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you all today.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jan. I think we will hand it over to Natalia to begin the conversation on the webinar. Natalia.
Thanks, Sasha. Nice to hear from Jan about the Academy. Also want to learn more. So my role really is to kind of present the bigger picture before Sasha dives into the challenges of conducting rural research and findings from the field, from the recent project. I kind of just wanted to explain a little bit more how we look at agriculture and intersection of agriculture with financial services and specific challenges associated with that. So just a brief context, and I'm representing the Agritech network where I'm a co-founder and partner. So we specifically work in the intersection of agriculture, digital technology, climate and financial inclusion. That's quite a narrow space, I would say. But also that means that we are the only and the first consultancy focusing on digital ag globally. And we are a network of professionals, so we're still growing our team, and depending on the project, we compose the team accordingly. And we all united by the passion for a better climate smart and regenerative agriculture industry. So that's what we would like to see kind of being developed by the collaborative efforts of private sector partners, researchers, donors, funders, investors. So this is kind of something that we would like to contribute to ourselves. In terms of kind of this intersection of agritech and fintech, just want to give a little bit more of an explanation of how it came to be. So there is a broader understanding of agricultural digital financial services, which really doesn't, sorry, thank you for muting yourself, Darren. So the digital financial services, they really don't yet have like a standard definition out there. So we need to just be careful there and say that there is kind of like two components to agricultural financial services in digital realm. One of those is that there has to be a digital component to those, and that it has to also create value for the rural population in a way that could improve their farming business. So this could be a range of services. So when we talk about fintech and agriculture, really it could be anything that uses digital payments. And those payments could be just like on their own, but they also could be kind of a gateway to more of a broader financial inclusion for the rural population and the farming population, such as savings, credit, and insurance. It also could be a combination of one or several of those financial services with a specific product, such as, let's say, equipment or input. So there is already now combinations of, let's say, with payments you save, with micropayments you save for an input, or with digital payments through mobile money, you pay back the cost of the equipment that you kind of got on credit or on lease, such as sun culture. So then really it's like the more we add in terms of types of products, physical products, and kind of more of services, and start combining them with digital types of financial solutions, there is a variety of models out there, and all this world eventually starts being called kind of in a bit more hype way, such as insurtech or fintech. But really what we're talking about is the adoption of digital technology in farming sector, and specifically the role that the digital technology can play in including financially the previously excluded farming population. So in terms of like the bigger opportunity, you know, like why is this happening and why is there so much hype and investment and funding gone into that space, is the massive unmet demand for both the financing from smallholders, which is estimated to be at least $160 billion annually. And this financing includes not just financing for things that we understand, like short-term loans, maybe inputs, maybe something else, but also long-term capital that would allow farmers to get equipment, to get maybe solar panels, irrigation, get dryers, get storage, cold storage, maybe greenhouses on the farm. All those things are currently not accessible to smallholder farmers on the continent, which also means that they are much more vulnerable to the climate change, and means that they are remaining to be excluded from
Natalia, sorry, we must have muted you.
That would be a big mistake to mute your presenter, but I understand, and I'll move on. Cool. I don't know where you lost me exactly. So
5 seconds ago. 5 seconds.
10 seconds. Okay.
No, 5.
Cool.
5.
I will say that like the gap in smallholder financing is something that is still been resolved, and we're very, very far from achieving closure of that gap. There is also a gap in insurance coverage, and why is it relevant here is because traditionally farmers cannot access insurance that is offered by insurance companies with offices in the big cities, because they usually assess the risk and assess whether they need to pay out to the farmer in traditional face-to-face way, which means the transactional costs for a smallholder farm insurance are way too high, which means that traditional insurance companies really are not offering insurance for smallholders. And that's a big opportunity for insurtech companies to come into that space, and they could also fall under the fintech realm. So notable examples that you might know of are Pula, Acre Africa, and Oko. So those are kind of the front-end players that are offering everything, including the interface for the farmers. So digital channels, in the summary, they allow to limit, to extend brick-and-mortar financial service providers, both the insurance companies and the banks, as well as actually the equipment providers as well, who want to loan the tractors or irrigation systems on lease. They allow to include new segments of customers that would be too expensive to serve without the use of digital channels, and also offer kind of a range of customization and personalized service which digital tools can provide because of the access to data and ongoing data collection on how the farmers use the services and what they request and access. So kind of moving forward, I just want to say that we can't really talk about the fintech until we talk about just the adoption of basic services such as mobile money. And this is kind of the adoption curve. I just wanted to show as a perspective. It was originally developed by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but eventually adopted by GSMA for the mobile money ecosystem, to show that one of the key challenges in serving rural areas is the willingness of the farmer to immediately cash out and just check that they actually can have access to money. But over time, as users start doing more cash in and cash out, they start getting more comfortable and they start using the mobile money for airtime top-ups, maybe sending money to their relatives, or sending money to merchants for some services, or paying for the taxi, or they can pay their bills for electricity. And eventually, when they get very comfortable with ongoing payments and institutional payments, they become like the ideal customers for starting to access digital credit, savings and insurance, and especially credit, because for that, you need to show a certain level of adoption and profile of payments coming in and out of your account. So really, it's just something for us to keep in mind, because very often we see that if we introduce very complex solutions like credit and savings to the unbanked population and didn't have access to mobile money, this results in massive challenges in adoption. And yes, UX will help a lot, but the ecosystem and general customer familiarity with mobile money systems in rural areas are critical for the adoption of the services. So let's hope that we all work on the products where mobile money is already widely adopted in rural areas, and then we just need to figure out how to make the rest of the service accessible and understandable, but we don't need to explain the basic, or they expect that the mobile money agents will be there while actually they don't exist. So ecosystem dependency is critical for fintech and agritech. And I will move more into the kind of on-the-ground realities when we're building mobile money based solutions in rural areas. It usually means that the companies, even the ones that are mobile money providers, whether it's MTN or Tigo, with deep understanding of how to serve the continent, like there are still realities which are specific to rural areas, such as there would be no roads, there would be no cold storage facilities, there would be no strong and wide distribution networks to partner with if you want to scale your product. There is patchy, unreliable connectivity. Sometimes it could be only 2G and sometimes 3G. And sometimes it would be just opportunity to make a call. So we need to be careful when designing solutions for such realities. Sometimes we have to digitize processes that exist only on paper, and sometimes even the paper doesn't exist. So here in the picture is actually from Ghana, in one of the sales, also like purchase points from Olam, where they purchase from smallholders, and there, if the farmer drops the bag and expects to receive the cash for the cocoa, and let's say the agent ran out of cash on that specific day, you would expect them to get some sort of like a paper receipt, but what we have learned that very often is just like IOU agreement, and the farmer kind of just will drop by next day and check if money is available. So the challenge for formal businesses and fintech in this space is that they have to suddenly digitize and formalize things that currently are very unstructured and very semi-formal, so to say. And then again, electricity outages mean that the solutions that we have for rural areas have to be able to deal with that. So with certain level of like information backup, offline, especially for those solutions to actually work on the ground. Otherwise, there will be no adoption from the users. There are such things, as I mentioned earlier, around banks not serving agricultural segment, and that is a long-standing problem. They see it as high risk, high transactional cost, and they would start serving agricultural segment if they're pushed by the government and the regulators to do so. But that's not the kind of preferred segment. Then if we're designing a solution for rural farmers, there would be lack of partnered companies that we could rely on. So service providers that can offer extension advice, equipment rental, leasing, insurance, which means that sometimes service providers that just start as e-commerce platform figure out that they also have to offer the pre-financing and sometimes inputs, and sometimes they also need to purchase and offer transport, as opposed to just connecting the farmer with the buyer, because no one else is available to come in and take off that part of the work that needs to be done, because the ecosystem is just underdeveloped. And of course, droughts, floods, extreme temperatures are not helping smallholder farmers in terms of planning, which means that it's higher risk segment to work with, but also that means that they need much more support than we would like to admit. And that results in us having to look for alternative solutions and partners and providers that can help. So of course, COVID-19 dramatically changed the environment in which I think actually YUGS had to conduct some of the research in offline and online simultaneously, trying to do what's possible in the situations where you actually cannot travel or cannot sit down and work with the farmer face to face. And many other things and specific to rural areas in agriculture that they don't teach you in the business school, or where they talk about opportunity in agriculture. And sometimes the reality is that investors from Silicon Valley are not fully understanding in terms of how underdeveloped the ecosystem is. And when we come to the farmer, so this is a picture from a field trip in Pakistan, and I know we're talking about Africa specifically today, but my experience is global, so it also includes Asia, and the lessons here are kind of specific to low and middle income countries globally. But farmers' reality all around the world, really, when we talk about smallholder segment, that they wouldn't have credit history, they wouldn't have a bank account, they wouldn't have savings or experience with savings. Sometimes they would have no working smartphone or no data. It would be Chinese, no-name phone that wouldn't support any operating system. They wouldn't have storage or cold storage for the products, which means that they have to sell at the price that's available on that day. Very low basic as well as low digital literacy. They also have multiple conflicting priorities, so it's not like a registered business where you have to commit certain amount of funds to your investors to spend this year on your activities. Like if somebody is sick or kids have to go to school and you need to buy more kind of stationery and uniforms, like this sometimes can take a priority for the farmer because they're operating as a household rather than an individual. They're extremely vulnerable to changes in markets and prices, changes in climate, and they experience low productivity, partially due to traditional farming methods, which haven't been updated for a long time and might not be relevant in the situations of climate change where we need different varieties of seeds and even different crops to grow in the first place. And no on-farm equipment for irrigation or working with the soil. So now try to design products that are going to work in this environment with this customer. So clearly that is a big challenge, and that's why user experience research and user centricity is very, very, very important. But I want to say it's important beyond the initial research phase that sometimes practitioners forget about. So it's not just something that you do before you design the product, but you can include farmers' perspective during the user testing in the field, like later when you already have the product developed, at the MVP stage, at the beta stage. So actually, if you as a product owner can include customer perspective every quarter or so and make it regular, use multiple tools to collect this data, because not all of this has to be expensive in field work. Some of this can be done using the data that digital products collect on the users. All of this could be useful in understanding which of the products are being used, which products are not being used, where the farmers might get stuck. Do they actually complete some of the processes we want them to complete on the menu? So there is a lot of data that digital products can offer for such analytics, but combining that with call surveys, with even quick polls on Net Promoter Score, and especially with user testing in the field rather than in a comfy air-conditioned office where the farmers are not themselves and you actually don't see the realities. So all of these options are highly recommended for rural products, and especially such complex products that involve mobile money component. So also want to remind us that there is a gender gap. Why is it important? Is that user experience really helps to include all types of users. And if it's not done, we act on assumptions of what our customers can and cannot do. And here is the latest data from GSMA gender gap. And as you could see, at the moment, Sub-Saharan Africa is the second highest gender gap globally, only after Southeast Asia. And that means that women are less likely to use mobile internet, they are less likely to use mobile money as well, and they are less likely to even access the mobile phone in the first place. So if you care about whether your services are accessible, you need to specifically during the UX work and more broadly when you're marketing and distributing your product and selecting the agents, you need to remember that you want to reach 50-50, both male and female farmers. And this is very often kind of an afterthought as opposed to design principle. So more specific advice on how to improve gender inclusivity of your product is to collect the data on who your users are, because if you don't know that, you can't improve the gender uptake. Look at the data segregated by gender, do specific women interviews and farm visits, specific marketing materials, women agents, and if you need to onboard the woman on a product or service and show them how to use it in functions, like allow more time for that, as well as kind of more broadly, you have to aim for diversity at all levels of your team, not just the agents, but also the workers in the customer care unit, also the managers and the top management. So if there is no female perspective throughout the company, some of those recommendations coming from the UX work actually could be lost. So this is kind of just a little bit of a context on how complicated this is, and hopefully Yux and Sasha will show us how to overcome those challenges and how to design the products around those barriers in fintech and agritech space. So if you want to connect with the Agritech network, here is our contact details, especially mine. Thanks, Yux, for inviting me to give that overview, and I'll hand over back to Sasha for the research best practice.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for giving us the high-level overview of the intersection between agritech and fintech. I'm just going to complement the information that you've shared early on with some of our experiences on conducting UX research in rural areas. And also, as you said, I'll be sharing more on some of the tips and learnings that we've had in doing this as well. So maybe moving on to the next slide. So for the next slide over here is about the preparation and logistics. We acknowledge that for every type of research in different contexts, research prep and participants recruitment can be a bit challenging. However, in our experience, there are additional layers of complexity where research locations are in hard to reach areas because of bad road network connectivity. And most of the time, when working with farmers, we would have to go and conduct the research in their farms, which might be further away from these hard to reach areas, right? So here it's really a good practice to foresee these challenges and plan for them, such as network connectivity issues. You would swap digital prototypes with paper prototypes or paper interview guides to facilitate really smooth research. Also, sometimes participants may not show up for one or two reasons that is known to them only. Therefore, you really need to have a buffer of participants to ensure that the goals of the research are met. So we use this technique in a research we conducted in Tanzania, Dodoma, where we our three lead farmers that we are scheduled to research with them did not show up. So we relied on the 5 people that we had a buffer of farmers with, and we were able to get a wealth of information from them and also understand from their perspectives, their challenges, their behaviors, their motivations for the research topic that we were dealing with. Moving on to the next slide here. On quantitative research. So for our research methodology, we usually have a mix of quantitative and qualitative methods because we believe these two methods have their strengths and their weaknesses as well. So really combining these two methods plays on the strengths of each other and really fills the gap of the other. So for quantitative research here, it really allows us to cover breadth and scope out the market in very quantifiable terms, like in numbers, right? And this information, it helps to point us in the right directions regarding the user segments to maybe focus on, and even helps us to identify key questions that are worth probing further in the qualitative research. So on to the next slide on our qualitative research. Some of the tools that we use over here are individual interviews, which allows us to gain a wealth of knowledge with the farmers that we are dealing with. In the rural areas, it's really key to understand that local leaders have a lot of power. Therefore, it's really good to liaise with them when you are conducting research in their neighborhoods or their community. So a good example here is a research we also conducted in Tanzania, where we, before starting the research, we went to the community leader's office to explain the purpose of the research, why we are there. We even had to write our names in the community registers to show that we are legally there and approved to conduct the research. Also, the dynamics of incentives is very important. You really need to read the room and understand the cultural context and adapt accordingly. So in some places that we've done research in, say for Rwanda, monetary incentives are rejected, and sometimes they're even seen as offensive or seen as a bribe. However, for some other communities in Tanzania, it's sort of expected. And over here, you really need to know the balance. Do I give money incentives or do I give commodities? What will be accepted and appreciated? On to our next methodology of focus group discussion. On to the next slide. Yes, thank you. For focus group discussion, this is another qualitative method that we use for rural areas, especially because rural communities often have a strong social tie, and really focus group discussion can play on these dynamics. So participants may feel more comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas in a group setting with their peers who have similar experiences and perspectives. So for a project that we worked on, we would usually have small groups of people for about 6 to 8 participants, grouped in, say, different profiles of, let's say, gender, and it will be facilitated by someone of equal gender so that it's more comfortable for them to share their experiences with us as well. The location of the focus group is also a very key factor here. Here, you really want to think about where you're having this discussion. Is the environment a familiar environment to them? Is this a location that is associated with negativity or positive vibes? How far do they need to travel to even get to the location? And how would this sort of transportation affect their energy levels? There are also certain little things that you need to take into consideration. Something as simple as the chairs that they are sitting on. Are they sitting on a bench? Are they sitting on plastic chairs? And for how long are we even conducting or facilitating this conversation? Because usually people get tired and they would zone out quickly if they're not comfortable. And if this happens, it would really affect the quality of your data that you are gathering. Another methodology that we use over here is usability testing, where we give farmers the digital application for them to interact with them. And over here, we really want to verify the digital literacy and acceptance of the products that we've built, and really trying to improve upon the user journeys. So some of the things to really think about here is maybe having to build offline prototypes in situations where you are going to a community where network connectivity is an issue. Another good practice over here would be to test with similar devices. So if the farmer uses a feature phone or a smartphone, you would test with that device to really understand how they use that device and interact with your app on that device. Moving on to the next slide on icon testing. This is also a very good way we gather insights in a very fun and interactive way, actually. Research can actually be fun in a very gamified approach. And we use this icon testing approach, especially in places where literacy and digital literacy might be relatively low. This particularly works because visual communication is really universal. So simply spreading out a set of cards or icons and asking participants to explain or pick what best suits their understanding really bridges the gap over there. Another good thing is it's in icon testing, it's really starts a conversation of building trust and aligning with technologies and understanding. This would create a sense of ownership in the solution and lead to higher adoption rates in whatever digital solution that you are bringing to the community. So on the side of the slide over here, we have a very interesting quote from a farmer who told us that we are introducing foreign icons to them and these mean nothing to them. And this was even after we had conducted the icon testing activity with them. So really this goes to show the importance of localizing content to really suit the needs of the participants you are dealing with. On the next slide, we have an image of some of the icon testing activities that we have. Another slide, moving on to the next slide, is a very interesting image here where we use a very creative way of engaging with participants in talking about finance. So over here, we had printed like fake money and asked them to place how many or how much they spend on each of these images. So for example, how much do you spend in a week on family or transportation? And this activity was very helpful because in most rural communities in Africa, the topic of money is hush-hush and very sensitive, right? So in some cultural contexts, it's even deemed as a taboo to speak about finances with strangers outside of the family. And some people even fear of the repercussions that might follow with sharing this information with outsiders. So having a very creative, fun, interactive way of collecting data is really important over here. Moving on to the next slide. On capacity building, for we at Youth, we are big believers of knowledge sharing and spreading the value of UX research with the community by setting up webinars like this and also building capacity of our clients. We really love to collaborate with our clients on the field where possible because it really helps them to really connect with the farmers and empathize with their users. It's not just about we coming in as an agency or as a consultant doing our work and leaving without making any impact. However, we acknowledge that many of our clients might either be new to the idea of research or they might be seasoned researchers, but they might not have the requisite knowledge in conducting research on the continent. So for this, we facilitate capacity building workshops based on a very structured curriculum that we've built over the years on UX research basics, best practices, and also importantly, positioning on posture and power dynamics that can affect the quality of the results that we get on the field. So by doing this, it really helps us to align with the clients and really work as a team when we go on the field to conduct research with the participants. Moving on to the next slide, another methodology over here is creativity workshops. So after all is said and done, we've collected all the field research, we've done the needful, we've spoken to the people that we need to speak. What do we do with the information? How do we process this to make more actionable insights to solve people's problems? So for most of our projects, we really love to have the collaborative component again. So we really set up creativity workshops where we share insights and brainstorm solutions using very different prioritization techniques to really align on the intersection between the business needs and the user's needs. And that's very important. Some of the techniques or the prioritization techniques that we use over here are the impact effort matrix. And this really focuses on how much impact a feature on an app would have on the users and how much effort would it take the business or the client to actually implement this. Or another prioritization method that we have is the MOSCO, which simply spells out its must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, and won't-haves. And over here, we focus on mapping out which features are top priority that should go into the version 1, and which features could go into the follow-up versions of the application. So on the next slide, we have two examples or pictures depicting some of the creativity workshops that we've had. Before the pandemic, we would used to run these creativity workshops in person, where we would have all the stakeholders from the client side, the researchers, industry experts, really coming together for a couple of days to really share all the insights. However, during the pandemic, when we're starting our 2-year engagements with GSMA, we really had to find a different way of making this work virtually. And I believe Miro was a key tool in helping us achieve that. So currently, I can confidently say that Miro is one of the best used tools at UX at the moment because it really facilitates our collaborative methods. Moving on to the next slides, we really want to understand what exactly are the barriers to adoption of agri-fintech solutions and how can we use UX research to overcome these barriers. Some of these challenges have been explored by Natalia early on. However, I'm just going to give the perspective of the UX impacts in 3 different barriers to adoption. So for the first barrier to adoption is the lack of trust in the introduced technology. And this could be because of multiple reasons, like limited education and digital education, lack of familiarity and access to digital solutions, limited trust in institutions and organizations such as the government, banks, corporations, and really the list could go on and on, actually. However, some of the good practices here is to really involve the users from the start of the process by really leveraging on local researchers who have a cultural understanding of the research topic that you are trying to achieve. Another key or good practice over here is transparency and accountability. Over here, it's really good to give participants the option to back out of an interview whenever they don't feel comfortable going through with it. So presenting them with consent forms and having them sign or give an audio acceptance of their participation in the research is very important to sort of build that trust in them. Another good practice would be onboarding users into the digital platform using real human beings. Really ensures that there is this human connection still available. So a good example in this case would be where MTN and Vodacom leverages on their existing mobile money agents in different communities to really ensure a higher adoption in mobile money services. Moving on to the next slide. Thank you. For our second point on low literacy and digital literacy, it's always really good to build or develop to the understanding of your target audience, right? And literacy here is very subjective because for some countries, they've really built their understanding of their local language, and they are very literate within this sector. So for example, when we conducted field research in Tanzania, we realized that most farmers can read and write comfortably in Kiswahili, right? Therefore, using their language to communicate more on the app features would be best. But a contrast analogy over here is in Ghana, most of our farmers over here speak the local dialects very fluently. However, reading and writing might be a bit of a challenge. So over here, going more with visual cues, voice-based services really works best to unearth the context that we are working with. In our last slide over here on connectivity issues, I could also list a number of challenges or factors that affect this or causes this connectivity issues. However, it's really always best to explore alternative solutions. So a good example here is to use SMS or USSD, which is easily available on low-cost feature phones, such as what we have on the right on the slide, or voice-based services to bridge that gap. A good example here with our working with Just Dig It, which is a Netherlands-based climate organization that creates access to environmental regreening information for low farmers using low-cost smartphones like what we have here in a very gamified approach. And maybe just some tips for the researchers. I believe I've mentioned it early on, but just to drive the point home over here, it's really good to build offline versions of your prototypes when you're going into the rural areas. You really never know what will happen. So always having that backup is always very essential. And also having paper versions of your interview guides or your discussion guides is also very essential. Sometimes going the manual way is actually very good. Now, onto our last point of our agenda. We want to round up the conversation with exploring how can we grow within the sector. What are some of the tips? What are some of the learnings? Some of the resources that we have to share. In the next slide, we have listed some resources over here on how to build your knowledge in research and design, and also Agritech in Africa. So for research and design knowledge, we as Youth Academy, we are building a line of webinars, as I mentioned before, in the coming months on EdTech, FinTech, health, and gender studies. And we also identified 2 additional training centers on the continent, which is D-School Africa based in South Africa and the African Design School based in Benin. Also, some tips for UX practitioners. Really, learning from communities is very essential. So we have a list of some communities that we worked with in the past who are phenomenal in really distributing the value of UX research in a knowledge content base. For Agritech knowledge in Africa, we have resources, really good resources from GSMA, better than Cash Alliance, I believe, and our very own Agtech network are really good resources for building knowledge in Agritech solutions in Africa. I just want to point out that this list is not exhaustive at all. And I'll just really encourage everyone to leave some of your suggestions in the comments box or the chat of some of the resources that you might know that we haven't listed over here, so that we are able to build a resource base and really share with the community as that. Before I round up the conversation, this is just a lineup of some of the webinars that we have in the coming months. So for Agritech, for health, education, gender, and some case studies in September. As the months are proceeding, we will be sharing more content on specific details on these different verticals on our social media, LinkedIn and Instagram also. I think at this point, I would move myself to a pause to collect feedback, questions from the comment section or from anybody who has some questions also.
So, Sasha, there are some questions in the chat. First, Camille was asking Natalia specifically why banks do not serve the agricultural segment. So, Natalia, could you please elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I think they do. They do serve agricultural segment, but they are more likely to lend to commercial farmers and kind of larger farmers, as opposed to smallholder. So if you are a larger farmer, then you could probably show your land title. You probably can show some records of selling your produce commercially, maybe to supermarkets. Maybe you have some contracts that you could show. So you need to be operating your farm as a business and have certain business records and assets, at least the land, and some sort of prospects to sell your produce and mitigate your risks to be interesting for the bank. So bank also would normally kind of verify those records, and that would mean, let's say in urban environment, that they could check with your employer whether they actually have sent you the salary payments. So kind of second source of information is usually required by such agencies. In the case of a smallholder farmer, they're not likely to have such documentation. They're not likely to actually keep the records and approach kind of farming as a business. From that perspective, they might not have digital records to start with, but then also you might be selling to a middleman, or they might be selling at the farm gate instead of having direct relationship with the buyer. So that means that the farmer would just not be able to pass through those kind of gates of what the bank is requiring from a customer to be able to lend them. Also, you need to have some history of being able to repay the credit. So that's kind of another bottleneck. So would the farmer actually been able to show something like this, if most of the financial services they access are informal? So they can ask to borrow money from the community or their relatives and then give them money back at the end of the season. But they wouldn't have records to kind of verify that. And I think the third major point is just the transactional cost. So if the bank says, I actually want to see your farm and how well you're doing, farmers are small, dispersed, they're far away from the commercial urban centers. It would be uneconomical for the bank to actually go and survey the farms which are distributed and small and kind of located far away from the kind of commercial centers. I see this as kind of main reasons, but I want to say, even moving aside the conversation about smallholders and their specific challenges and just lack of financial literacy on their side, and that's one of the reasons, I guess also as well, some of the solutions are not reaching that segment, is also that banks traditionally were not really eager to serve agriculture as a sector because it is seasonal. It means that the income is coming not monthly, but it's coming maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. Of course, there are a couple of value chains which have more frequent transactions, and they might be more interesting for innovators to experiment with because you have more iterations and you have higher frequency of payments with which you can kind of gradually repay the credit. So I'll just give an example, eggs or dairy, they offer you an opportunity for frequent but smaller payments that could be more interesting for some of the banking kind of services. But yeah, I think there are many more challenges, and there is a push to serve agricultural segment, and hopefully with the digital innovation we can reduce the transactional cost, but also improve the transparency into what the farmer can actually produce, and show that they have been working hard on the farm. And with some digital records, with some economic identity, maybe we can start building with this digital data points. We can reduce this perceived risk to the banks, and ideally also being able to couple the financial services with insurance, so that if because of the climate, drought, unpredictable weather patterns, farmer for some reason cannot repay the loan, the insurance company can come in. Because if the farmer cannot pay back the loan, and that prevents him from accessing the loan ever again in his life, that would be just a very unfortunate result of such lack of insurance. So I'm just kind of steering a little bit towards more of like climate angle here, because that specific climate-related risk is increasing every year, and that could become yet another reason why farmers are not being served, while in fact we should be looking for solutions that can reduce the risk of serving the farmer as opposed to kind of neglecting the segment altogether. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was very, very detailed, and I think also brings to light how important the whole ecosystem is. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Dauda also has a question that says, how long do individual interviews typically take? So how long on average do they take? Sasha, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, so in terms of duration, we usually keep it between 45 to an hour per interview. We really don't want to go beyond that time frame, because beyond the hour, the 60 minutes time frame, people tend to get tired, or people just start to maybe think about something else because they have a lot of things on their mind when they're sitting in front of you. And also sometimes it's really good to analyze the people, the participants' body language, because sometimes you'd be interviewing somebody, but with their body language, you can see that they're not fully present. So you can ask them, do you want us to do it in a later time? Do you want us to do it in a different location? So really trying to read the body language and really understand if the individual is present is very important as well. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you for that. If you have any follow-up questions regarding that, you could just leave them in the chat. Brian is asking that if network connectivity isn't stable or unreliable in rural areas, does that not put assumption at the forefront during the usability test phase when using the offline prototype? So the assumption here is that when the user does have stable internet or stable connectivity, he or she will use the digital solution that's being offered. So either Natalia or Sasha, do you have an answer to that question? Sasha, you're on mute.
Yes, so sorry. I was saying I could give an answer, and maybe Natalia could also answer to it. So in our experience, we realized that in most of these rural areas, the network connectivity is bad. Sometimes you'd go into the community and there are just certain spots in the community where the network works, right? And maybe that place that the network works is not where you're going to conduct the interview or the usability testing. So it's really good to think ahead. Essentially, what we are just advocating here is just have a backup plan. If you are going in with the digital prototype and you have a backup offline version, it's always best, because if it's not working within that situation, you can always rely on the backup plan to ensure that whatever you went into this community to do, you've done it. It's also very important because before you actually move into these rural areas, you've the transportation, the bad network, the bad roads, and maybe other factors have really affected you actually getting there. So you want to ensure that once you are there, the information that you are there to gather is what you actually end up achieving. So that's why it's really good to have like a backup plan in these situations. Natalia, would you like to add on to this?
I can try. I'm not sure I actually understand the question very well. So like, what exactly is the assumption that we are making here? Is it the assumption that the user will use our solution, but actually we can't verify that? Or is it the assumption kind of that as long as a prototype is good enough, eventually they will go online and use it, and actually we're already operating with the wrong assumptions by testing offline solutions? So I'm not entirely sure I understand the question. I would kind of slightly steer it and say, isn't it right that we have to try and develop solutions that work for the farmers, even in the areas with low connectivity? I think we must try and work around those areas, as opposed to sit back and wait for all those areas to be connected to 5G. I don't think we have time for that. I think it's like the worst exclusion strategy, that because these probably are the people which already don't have access to roads and healthcare and many other services. So it's better to see what solutions we could offer instead. And, you know, it could be that we find out that in this situation, kind of the while we're testing our paper prototype, we also learn that the connection, let's say, is unstable, but it comes in the evening always, or it comes at night when the pressure on the network drops. Or we learn during those interviews with our paper prototype that there is just no connection unless you drive to the nearing village. And that's when you start designing for like SMS, IVR, like USSD channels that do not rely on the internet connectivity. Or there could be hybrid models that we worked on before, well, let's say a procurement officer, which is kind of more centrally located. So they have like on their end an interface which is internet kind of reliant, but could work offline and can sync when it goes back online with a kind of central database and send information on the farmers that have sold their produce today. But the farmer himself would not require internet connectivity to operate the service. I think what's important is that we are there, we are prepared to test whatever the situation is, and during that testing, understand what are the realities on the ground and try to design in the way that removes this bottleneck for the end user. And I've just given a couple of examples on how it could be done. So I hope that answers the question, and I'm sorry if I didn't understand it very well.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Natalia. I hope that answers your question, Brian, and please feel free to add follow-up questions in the chat. Ogadima is asking, how do we get the government to force the financial institutions to fund smallholder farmers? Natalia, do you have the answer to that question?
I would say regulation. Regulators can create the rules and say that 10% of your portfolio has to be for agriculture. This is done by Tanzanian government, for example. And it doesn't mean I'm a big fan of like very restrictive regulation, but there are examples of how it could be achieved. So similarly, the regulators can say that every lending for smallholder farmers has to come together with insurance, right? So there are different ways, and it's possible, and it's just, you know, the capacity building of the governments is also, you know, a work to be done. So, unfortunately, but there are best practices in the world at how it could be achieved. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalia. Just for the sake of time, we'll be going through the questions a bit faster. Dauda is asking, how do you take account of the durability of the Agritech solutions that are being offered? So I guess the question is, how do you assess the durability of the solutions? Sasha, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I can give an answer. So over here, with the solution, you really want to ask yourself, what is the problem the Agritech solution is trying to solve? Who are the users the Agritech solution is targeting? And is it doing that with the solution that's has been presented? If it sort of checks those initial questions of, does it solve the problem? Does it bring value to the people that they're trying to help? I guess you could start to think about it more as, okay, this is actually a durable solution or a feasible solution where it's actually solving the problem, right? So I think that's like sort of the first layer, assessing the problem that it's trying to solve and assessing if it's bringing value to the users.
Thank you, Sasha. I hope that answers your question, Dauda. Yuvan is asking, what are the available financing opportunities for Agritech solutions developed in Africa and intended to be deployed to rural farmers? So they specify that they're asking this question due to the low level of Agritech solution deployment in rural areas, despite the numerous workable solutions that are emerging over time. Natalia, do you have an answer to that?
It's a good question, but it's also a very difficult question. So just as banks are not eager to serve agricultural segment, they would be also reluctant to lend to the an Agritech or fintech that in turn lends to the farmer, right? So it creates a big problem, and I think we do need some innovation in the financial market in the local kind of countries where we're working. And that has been raised by multiple, like different types of practitioners right now. There are alternatives, and they are not that pretty, or they don't look very scalable to me. They're more like a patchy kind of fix that we could work with right now is when there is kind of a blended financing model where you as a provider, let's say you pre-finance the smallholders that you're working with, and then you're working on your side with some other organizations, let's say like USAID, IKEA Foundation, Rabobank, or someone like that, that could offer first loss guarantee or second loss guarantee for you to reduce the risk of lending to the smallholder. And I think if you work in such kind of blended financing structure, the local banks would be more willing to come in because they could see that there are other partners on board that are sharing the risk. But there is no template that you can just replicate for financing smallholders. And unfortunately, we have seen that lots of organizations, not just Agritechs, but also fintechs, but just traditional agribusinesses that have been out there for much longer than fintechs. They've been there for dozens of years trying to kind of work with smallholders, and they face the same exact challenges that the farmers have to be pre-financed. So the way they're doing it is they just take this debt on their own balance sheet. And I don't know how realistic it is to expect from a startup to do the same, but two companies that I know have done similar work is M-Copa and Sunculture. Sunculture is not agriculture specific, Sunculture is, but they couldn't find a good arrangement with the bank, so they decided to keep the debt on their balance sheet. So they are lending to the farmers directly, which means that you need to have very patient investors on your end, and maybe impact investors that understand your model and are happy for you to use the funds for such lending, which is very again, like risky, and again, not a very scalable solution from my perspective. But ultimately, we just need local banks to increase appetite and be more educated on working with startups and being able to support them and financing agricultural segment. I think that's all I can offer for now on this question, but it's a very, very, very relevant topic, and unfortunately not enough is done in this space.
Thank you, Natalia. I believe we have one more question. Lat is asking, what are the most adapted user research techniques to collect information? And also on which channels, so either mobile apps, IVRs, SMS, or chatbots. So on which channels are we to consider when deploying Agritech solutions? Either Sasha or Natalia, do you have any answer to that? I believe those are two different questions.
Yes, I can take the first one. Over here, so what are the most adapted user research techniques to collect information, right? So that's some of what we shared on individual interviews, usability testing, icon testing, card sorting. These are really good ways that we use to gather insights from the field. Individual interviews are more on an individual level, as the name depicts. But for a more interactive and participatory technique, you would want to go for usability testing, icon testing, card sorting, which really gamifies the approach or the research approach that you're trying to do. Another key insight over here that I'd like to share is I believe we had a research back in Ghana with some farmers, cocoa farmers, where we're trying to test some radio jingles with them. So what we would have them do is to listen to the radio jingles that we had brought from our side and do a little bit of a role play and ask them if they were the ones who were tasked with the opportunity to come up with a jingle, how would they go about it? So we use a form of like role play to really get their insights. What kind of information would you like to hear on the radio to incentivize you to use mobile money, right? So I guess like it's really dependent on what you're trying to get out of the research, and picking and choosing which of these methods. You can pick one of the methods and combine it with another, right? And make it work for the context. I think that's what I can provide. I believe that answers the question, right?
Thank you, Sasha. And then the final question is, which channels should we be considering when deploying Agritech solutions? So mobile apps, chatbots, etc.
Okay. Yes, so I can maybe add on to that. So I don't think you should just consider one solution over the other. It's really what do the users need. You can have a mix of two at the same time or a mix of three at the same time. So a good example I'd like to share again is like research that we conducted in Rwanda and Tanzania for digitizing procurement for farmers. So over here, we had 3 different types of Agritech solutions for 3 different types of people. So for the agribusinesses, we had like a desktop version of the application that sort of links with the other versions of the solution. We also had for the mobile money agents, like a mobile-based application that helps them to really check in on the farmers or maybe assist the farmers on certain things that they need to do. But on the farmer side, we would go more on the route of using USSD or SMS for them. So it's really looking at the segments of the users that you're trying to help or solve, and really tailoring the approach to them. What are their needs and how can I best suit their needs with the toolbox that I have? So it's not like picking one or the other, but it's really having a very holistic view over here is really important for Agritech solutions. I think that's what I'll add over there. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Sasha. I think we're at time now. So any final words from Sasha and Natalia?
Natalia, would you like to go?
Just want to say thanks everyone for joining. Good questions. We enjoyed it and hope to stay in touch. Sasha, over to you.
Yes. Thank you everyone for joining us. Natalia said we really loved the interaction in the chat section, and we look forward to seeing most of you in our next webinar. We'll be sharing more of this information on LinkedIn and Instagram, so kindly watch this space, as we would like to build a community around these conversations that we are having. Maybe finally, as you end the Zoom meeting, you would have like a survey to sort of give your feedback on this webinar so we can improve the webinars for the following sessions. I mean, we are a UX agency, so collecting feedback is a specialty over here. So thank you everyone for joining. We would move this to a pause and round up the conversation. Thank you all for joining.